winds up to 40 miles an hour. This is WBEZ.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. Good morning. I'm David Green.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Many of the 42 million Americans flying this holiday season will board planes this weekend. And they are flying during a season of debate over airline rules.
Yesterday we told you about the Federal Aviation Administration facing calls to relax its rules on using e-readers like the Kindle. And today, the hassle of getting through those often long security lines at the airport.
The Transportation Security Administration has a few tips on how to get through more quickly, but critics wonder why the government is so intrusive to begin with. NPR's Brian Naylor reports.
For the tips, we turn to the TSA's Lisa Farbstein, who meets us at Reagan National Airport just outside Washington. As Christmas carols serenade us, Farbstein reaches into a bag of props and pulls out a snow globe. Yes, there's some good news this holiday season. You can now carry on small snow globes, as long as they're put in those plastic bags along with your other small bottles of liquids.
Here's my one bag. You can see I have a little snow globe right in there. Washington, D.C. survey of the White House. And I have to show you a tennis ball, and so you can see that it clearly is smaller than a tennis ball.
So snow globes smaller than a tennis ball are now okay to bring on board, and by the way, so are pies and fruitcakes, but not jars of jam or jelly or cranberry sauce over 3.4 ounces. They must be put in your checked luggage. The rule of thumb, says Farbstein,
basically, if you can spill it, spread it, smear it, squeeze it, spray it, pump it, or pour it, that's how you can tell.
Farbstein says there's a useful guide on the TSA's website, tsa.gov, that allows you to type in an item to see if it's allowed in your carry-on, and also a mobile app. Other advice, wrapped presents aren't such a good idea because if the TSA officers can't tell what's in the box, they'll want to unwrap it. Farbstein suggests using gift bags. And new this year, if you're traveling with children under 12, they don't have to take off their shoes. Neither do you if you're 75 and older.
We recognize that they're not likely to be terrorists, and so we allow them to leave their shoes on. That expedites the screening process. I mean, basically, we do know that not everybody is a terrorist. I mean, we totally understand that.
But the TSA's critics say they don't really understand that. Charlie Leoka is director of the Consumer Travel Alliance.
These kinds of rules really don't make any sense today, and we spend literally millions and millions of dollars searching for items now, which are of no harm.
After 9/11, the government ordered airlines to install hardened locked doors to the cockpit. Leoka says that pretty much eliminated the danger from small pocket knives, box cutters, and the like. So he says those intrusive searches at airport checkpoints are totally unnecessary.
You can't break into the cockpits anymore. They get locked up, and the pilots are safe. And we have an incredible intelligence operation going on, which now allows the government to screen every passenger for every flight against a terrorist watch list.
Leoka says the TSA should go back to using standard metal detectors at security checkpoints rather than the full body scanners, which have raised concerns about privacy and safety. But for now, holiday air travelers have no choice but to prepare themselves. So remember, you can carry on a small snow globe, but that gift jar of cherry preserves will be in a checked bag. Brian Naylor, NPR News, Washington.
In searching for ways to curb costs and improve care, some insurance companies are taking a page out of their own history books, running their own doctor's offices and clinics. This approach had mixed results the first time around, but insurance companies are now hoping more emphasis on primary care will be good for their patients and also their bottom line. Here's Tracy Samuelson from NPR's Planet Money team.
Dr. Michael Burns spent 8 years working in a Brooklyn hospital, and he saw firsthand why the United States spends more on healthcare than pretty much any other country in the world.
I would regularly see patients who were admitted to the hospital I took care of, got better, and then would discharge them with a plan of care. And they would come back either to the ER sick or to the floor. It's a common occurrence.
Maybe they wouldn't fill their prescriptions or take their medications. They'd miss appointments for follow-up tests or doctor's visits.
And if you look at the readmission rates in Brooklyn, they're 25%. So 25% of patients that we discharge are back in the hospital within a month.
This was obviously a problem for his patients because they were sick and not getting any better. But But it was also a problem for insurance companies because hospital stays are really expensive. But a company called CareMore has figured out a way to cut readmission rates for its Medicare patients to about half the national average. They've been doing it out west since the 1990s. Last summer, they were acquired by WellPoint, one of the largest health insurance companies in the country. And so now they're going national, adding 13 new clinics to their existing 30 by the end of the year.
Welcome to our campus center, our grand opening here today.
One of those new clinics is tucked in a strip mall in Brooklyn. If you're on Medicare and you choose to have a WellPoint affiliate administer your benefits, you can use this center for free. You still see your regular primary care doctor, but a lot of routine medical procedures can be done here cheaper. Plus extras, like they'll come to your house and install a scale that automatically sends your weight to the clinic. They'll design a workout for you that you can do in the clinic gym. They'll even cut your toenails to avoid foot infections. Brooklyn doctor Michael Byrne left his old job at the hospital and now works in this clinic. He says one advantage is being able to follow his patients to the hospital or a nursing home if they need care there. Plus,
I'm going to have more time per patient. I can spend, 45 minutes with a patient versus 15.
WellPoint is far from alone in putting more emphasis on primary care might save them money on costly diseases in the long run. Chris Wade is an analyst who covers the healthcare industry for Susquehanna Financial Group.
In recent years, it's been across the board. Certainly all of the large publicly traded insurers, Aetna, Cigna, Humana, United, and WellPoint, they're all pursuing slightly different, but generally similar strategies.
And this is largely due to new cost pressures on insurance companies coming out of healthcare reform for the Affordable Care Act.
We've seen an acceleration in the last 2 to 3 years of generally described as vertical integration with managed care guys who are either buying doctor groups, primary care clinics, or some relationship.
It's basically the original idea behind the HMO. Anthony Schroff, a professor of public health and community medicine at Tufts University, says it can work. That Kaiser Permanente, for example, has been doing this for decades and is generally well regarded with its customers. But many other insurers abandoned this model.
Where it doesn't work is when there aren't protections against skipping on care. Because the insurer and the provider are one and the same organization, then how does the public have the assurance that the company isn't staying in business by collecting money and then not giving the care that it should be given?
HMOs became unpopular in the 90s because people thought they tried to cut costs by limiting care. CareMore patient David Benavides says his diabetes is much better controlled since he signed up for the plan about 5 years ago. He visits a clinic often for checkups and blood work.
Actually, I go like once a month, and I feel better and better. Like I got the power to do what I want to do.
Which is mostly fixing up old cars in a shop behind his house. He says being healthy has been like being upgraded from a 6-cylinder engine to a V8. And for CareMore, keeping him in his shop and out of the hospital, that's just good business. Tracy Samuelson, NPR News.
It's 7:48. Good morning. You're listening to WBEZ. I'm Greta Johnson. Thanks for listening to 91.5 FM and streaming us online at WBEZ.org. WBEZ is supported by Specs, a Chicagoland optical shop with 21 neighborhood locations offering eyeglasses, sunglasses, contact lenses, and exams. Insurance and flex plans are accepted. SPEXchicago.com. Well, the roads aren't quite as bad as they could have been if we had gotten that snow that we were anticipating, but, some areas are still pretty slick. We'll hear more about them from Paula Fagan.
The Friday rush not bad at all. If you're doing long-distance traveling today, allow extra time for winter weather driving in Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. A little closer to home, high winds causing signal outages in Woodridge on Route 53 near 75th, and again on the south side at 87th and Ashland, so be careful. Getting around on the expressways, pretty obvious that a lot of folks are taking the day off. No delays at all in the Edens. The Kennedy's moving well, heading out to O'Hare from downtown. That's only 22 minutes. The Ike and the Stevenson are doing fine. The Ryan inbound slows into downtown. 95th to the Circle at 17. The Ford and 57, no problem at all. Lakeshore Drive is moving well. 8094 eastbound at Klein. We had a couple of earlier accidents. They're now off to the side. I-65 and the Indiana Toll Road moving at decent paces, and all 4 Illinois tollways are clear. Support for traffic provided by Kohl's Department Store. I'm Paula Fagan with traffic on WBEZ.
Thanks, Paula.
Earlier today in This American Life, an animal's kid Christmas was magical. In his family's house, he and his siblings could hear but never see Jacko the elf. They met a mysterious Christmassy figure named Klaus Hoffman and Chris Kringle.
He broke out one bone. And he said this is one of the bones from the original Rudolph. He thought I'd use it to call the reindeer.
Lights, camera, Christmas. Later today. Tonight at 7, tomorrow morning at 10. WBEZ.
WBEZ is supported by Mercy Hospital and Medical Center, offering orthopedic care and utilizing minimally invasive procedures and personalized care. Information at mercy-chicago.org. Stay tuned, more news just ahead. And coming up in 1 hour on the morning shift, we'll hear from a former OSHA officer who offers history about the Office for Workplace Safety, Occupational Safety and Hazard Association standards and practices. The time now is 7:51, 29 degrees, high today around 30. This is WBEZ.
Well, the Christmas season is when retailers make the bulk of their profits, when Hollywood blockbusters rake in money, and Broadway theaters are filled to capacity. But for Broadway, the season poses a challenge. In recent seasons, Broadway theaters have staged special limited-run holiday musicals, among them adaptations of A Christmas Story and Elf. The production costs are high. The season is short. Jeff London asked how these shows make any money.
It's costing just as much to do this Broadway show as it does a Broadway show that can run for years and years and years.
Gerald Gehring is lead producer of A Christmas Story, a new musical based on the popular movie of Gene Shepard's short stories about growing up in Indiana in the 1940s. This $9.5 million show is only playing for 8 weeks on Broadway, and Gehring freely admits there's no way it'll make back its investment by the end of its run.
A lot of investors are used to, let's put money in a Broadway show and hope it's the Book of Mormon. And we recoup fast and we run forever. And that's such a rarity in any model, any business really. So our investors have a different approach. It is one of patience. It's one of long-term strategy. And when I say it's an annuity for us and our families for a few generations to come.
The way it usually works on Broadway is this. If a show is successful, it then has several touring productions, international companies, and eventually gets licensed so it can get produced at professional theaters, community theaters, and schools. For a smash hit like, say, Cats, profits from all these income streams can be in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Just sing a Christmas song. It's like magic if it was all on. Just spread some Christmas cheer by singing loud to hear.
This new breed of holiday musicals has both built-in advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is they're based on well-known movie properties, so they all have name recognition. The disadvantage is it only makes sense to produce them for a couple of months around Christmas time. Even if a Broadway run may be something of a loss leader, it's an important way of branding a show, says Raymond Wu of Warner Brothers Theatrical. They're producing Elf, based on the Will Ferrell comedy, which is currently playing a 9-week Broadway run.
We figured with the Broadway branding, it helps with subsequent productions or licensing, tours. People will say, oh, that was on Broadway, and it's a great title, great story, and it did well on Broadway, and we want to see that too.
Just spread some Christmas cheer by singing
Jeremy Gerard, theater critic and reporter for Bloomberg News, says these shows really can make some of their costs back during a short Broadway run.
These are shows that appeal to a holiday audience, tourist trade, families. And producers aren't stupid. They know that there's a lot of money made in this brief time. if you watch your numbers, if you keep your production costs down and your ticket costs high.
And top ticket prices for Elf and A Christmas Story are in the vicinity of $160, with premium tickets as much as $350. But according to the producers of holiday shows, the real money to be made is beyond Broadway. Elf, which had a Broadway run a couple of years ago, is already getting new productions across the country, says Raymond Wu.
This year we have an 8-week, 5-city tour of Elf out there that we partnered on. There's going to be a production this holiday season in Seattle.
When a room is gloomy and its atmosphere is called it quits, then you must remember that December is a time for glitz. Never stop until each lamp on your Christmas tree is sparkle, jolly, twinkle, jingly.
Gerald Gehring, producer of A Christmas Story, has similar plans for next year. A first-class tour and licensing local productions at major regional theaters. But like Wu, he's looking years ahead. He hopes the show can also go on tours where it plays single nights and short runs in smaller markets. And then there's licensing for amateur and stock productions. So A Christmas Story may be playing at a school or community theater near you 5 or 6 years from now.
I think, honestly, the only way to make your money back without taking 20 years is a combination of all those models put together.
But are these shows any good? Critic Jeremy Gerard has liked some and not much cared for others. In recent years, Broadway has also seen adaptations of Dr. Seuss's The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Mr. Grinch.
And Irving Berlin's White Christmas.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
Gerard says what they all should be and what may account for their appeal is a slightly retro vibe, harkening to a less edgy time.
I think it's silly to go into these shows expecting anything other than what they want to do, which is a crowd pleaser. So the producers do have an imperative to put together something that's entertaining, but I don't expect going in to see Angels in America or Sweeney Todd. Who would want that at Christmas time?
A Christmas Story is playing at the Lunt-Fontanne Theater through December 30th. Elf plays at the Al Hirschfeld Theater through January 6th. For NPR News, I'm Jeff London in New York.
Good morning. It's just before 8 o'clock. You're listening to WBEZ Chicago. WBEZ is supported by WTTW Prime, presenting religion and ethics news weekly. On this week's program, a discussion of the major religion and ethics stories anticipated in 2013, Saturday, December 29th at 6 a.m. on WTTW Prime. Let's take a look at traffic. Here's Paula Fagan.
Well, as a result of the high winds, we have signals out in West Chicago at Fabian and North Kirk Road, on the south side at 87th and Ashland, and again at Woodbridge at Route 53 and 75th. Need to be careful. In McHenry County, they got a lot of snow on Route 20 between Marengo and Hampshire is particularly icy, so allow extra time and go slow. In Chicago, nothing too bad. The Edens is really quiet. Kennedy looks great in both directions. The Ike and the Stevenson both are moving at decent speeds. No real troubles at all on the Ryan, the Ford, 57, Elgin O'Hare or Skyway. Lakeshore Drive looks great. So do the Illinois tollways. I'm Paula Fagan with traffic on WBEZ.
Thanks, Paula. Coming up in this 8 o'clock hour, the Senate's number 2, Democrat Dick Durbin, reacted strongly to Republican lawmakers' introduction of a Plan B to the House floor late last night.
This is a waste of time and tragically unfortunate for this economy, as weak as it is, to be going through these political gyrations a few days before Christmas.
A look at how internal House politics are playing in efforts to avert the so-called fiscal cliff. That story, and coming this hour at 8:30, we take a moment of silence to commemorate the tragedy that occurred at Sandy Hook School in Newtown, Connecticut last week. Now, It is just about 8 o'clock, broadcasting from Chicago's Navy Pier. This is WBEZ Chicago, 91.5 FM, and WBEQ Morris, 90.7 FM. 29 degrees right now. High today around 30 degrees. Wind taking us as cold as 7 degrees with wind chill. Winds up to 45 miles per hour today. Right now we have gusts at 27 miles an hour. The time is 8 o'clock.
Good morning. Medicare has begun rewarding hospitals that provide quality care and cutting payments to those that don't. We'll have the details on Morning Edition from NPR News. House Speaker John Boehner fell short of the votes he needed for a plan to change tax laws. I'm David Green.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. It was part of an effort to pressure the White House over fiscal talks. The House went home for Christmas without passing anything, as Tamara Keith reports. We'll also spend time celebrating Christmas as they do in Russia with grandfather frost and an old-style calendar. And we'll hear about some of your favorite holiday dishes. It's Friday, December 21st, and in spite of some people's reading of the ancient Mayan calendar, the world has yet to end today. And the news is next. From NPR News in Washington.
Wow, shortest day of the year today.
Members of Congress are headed home for the holidays without a deal to avert the so-called fiscal cliff of tax increases and spending cuts. Speaker John Boehner could not find the vote for his proposal that would have included tax increases for the highest income Americans. NPR's Ron Elving says Republicans have taken a fairly big chance by rejecting Boehner's proposal.
The huge gamble here is that somehow by having this demonstration of disarray and weakness, people are going to then say, well, what has the Senate got? And say, well, gee, the Senate's responsible. They haven't done anything. Well, the Senate actually has done something. They've actually passed a bill already that holds harmless everybody under $250,000.
That's NPR's Ron Elving. Former Republican Chairman Haley Barbour is trying to call attention to the Senate. Here he is on CBS.
The House has already passed legislation to avert the fiscal cliff, and the Senate has refused to take it up.
But the House legislation doesn't provide some protections the Senate bill does, and which the president insists upon. Russian lawmakers have approved a bill that would bar Americans from adopting Russian children. NPR's Corey Flintoff reports the move comes in retaliation for U.S. legislation that would sanction human rights violators in Russia.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said yesterday that the U.S. legislation is humiliating to Russia, and he spoke in support of the adoption ban. But Putin also acknowledged that the ban may violate a Russian-American agreement on adoptions that recently took effect, and he did not say whether he would sign it. Today's vote in the Russian parliament drew protesters who said orphan children should not be used as pawns in political games. The legislation would also ban Russian political groups that receive funding from the United States. Corey Flintoff, NPR News, Moscow.
Funerals continue for victims of the Connecticut shootings that killed 26 people in a school, plus the shooter and his mother last week. One family with roots in Utah brought the remains of their 6-year-old daughter back to Ogden. Robbie Parker, the father of Emily Parker, said on returning to Utah and seeing thousands of pink ribbons that he understood how many people the tragedy had affected.
Even though this was such a very personal and internal thing for us, I started to really feel how much it touched not only the families and the other loved ones that we knew in the area, but how it touched everybody everywhere.
Ogden Mayor Mike Caldwell had this to say to the Parker family.
We are grateful and honored that you've chosen to bring Emily back to this community.
And Caldwell says the Parkers will always be welcomed with open arms in Ogden. The National Rifle Association holds a press event this morning, its first since the shootings in Connecticut, entering the conversation on gun rights and gun control. A group called Wiki Weapons is working to download a gun design, make it work buildable on a 3D printer. This is NPR. The big storm that's blanketed the plains and Midwest with snow is arriving in the east, largely as a rainstorm.
Most of the storm will be rain from New York City across Boston up into Maine, but as the colder air arrives during the later part of the day, Some of that rain will change over to light snow. There may be some lake effect snow downwind of Lakes Erie and Ontario, parts of western New York, Pennsylvania during the day.
That's NOAA meteorologist Greg Carbon. The new Libyan government says it's preparing to open its files on the case of Pan Am Flight 103, but it won't happen soon. 24 years ago today, a bomb planted on the New York-bound plane exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people in the air and on the ground were killed. The Libyan agent, who was the only person convicted for the crime, died this year. Larry Miller, reports a Libyan ambassador, says his country wants everyone to know what really happened.
Libya's ambassador to the UK says the Lockerbie files will be opened when his government has fully established security and stability. Mahmoud Naqwa told the BBC that could take at least a year, but then everyone will know what happened in that crime. He was responding to a recent request from Scotland's chief prosecutor for help in determining the facts. The British government as well says it's pressing Tripoli for swift progress and cooperation over Lockerbie. The ambassador says no formal agreement has been reached. Convicted bomber Abdul Basit al-Megrahi was suffering from cancer and controversially released from a Scottish prison in 2009 on compassionate grounds. He died in Tripoli in May, insisting to the end he was innocent. For NPR News, I'm Larry Miller in London.
And I'm Paul Brown. This is NPR News from Washington.
It's 29 degrees at 8:06. Good morning. I'm Greta Johnson with WBEZ News. Governor Pat Quinn has proclaimed today as a day of mourning in Illinois for the victims of last week's Connecticut school shooting. The gunman opened fire in a Newtown, Connecticut elementary school on December 14th, killing 26 people, including 20 children. Quinn issued a proclamation yesterday with all the victims' names from Sandy Hook Elementary School. He wants Illinoisans to observe the day with a moment of silence at 8:30 a.m. WBEZ will be observing that moment. The governor also asks organizations to ring bells 26 times in honor of each victim. Some Illinois lawmakers admit they may not have a compromise on pension reform before the end of the session in January. That comes after months of calls for them to act. WBEZ's Tony Arnold reports.
Illinois has the worst funded pensions in the country, and many officials say funding for other government programs is being cut in order to make payments to a poorly organized retirement system. The governor and financial analysts have called on the legislature to approve reforms in January, but it's looking like that may not happen. Senate President John Clarkson has hopes for his plan, which still needs approval in the House. It offers certain state employees a choice between health care in retirement or pay increases in retirement.
It's something which I think we can clearly pass within the next few months.
Lawrence Masal heads the Civic Federation, a financial watchdog group. He says lawmakers need to act soon, and if they wait to pass pension reform,
that would be horrible.
Masal says credit rating agencies have sent many signals to state lawmakers that more downgrades could be coming if pension reform isn't approved. Tony Arnold, WBEZ.
Illinois prison officials have started inmate transfers from the high-security Tams prison in preparation for a January 4th closing date. Department of Corrections spokeswoman Stacy Solano says 25 inmates from the Supermax prison in far southern Illinois are moving to Pontiac Correctional Center. That leaves more than 100 inmates in the single-cell isolation portion of Tams. Less than 100 minimum security inmates must move too. 3 Asian carp caught in the Humboldt Park Lagoon are now on display at Chicago's Shedd Aquarium. WBEZ's Lewis Wallace reports.
So, how do these beady-eyed creatures the size of small children show up in an enclosed lagoon in the middle of Chicago?
Nobody can say for sure.
That's John Rogner of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. He says the lagoons are stocked each year with loads of catfish and bluegills for urban fishing programs run by the DNR. But until a few years ago, the DNR didn't monitor those loads for Asian carp minnows. Now, with the carp already dominating some nearby rivers, Rogner says fishermen and boaters should never dump water or fish from one waterway into another.
Moving species from distant places into our native ecosystems is extremely damaging, and they need to monitor their own behavior.
The DNR gave the carp to the aquarium to raise awareness about the risks posed by invasive species. If Asian carp make it into the Great Lakes, scientists and environmentalists say it would devastate the ecosystem. Lewis Wallace, WBEZ.
Now here's Paula Fagan with traffic.
Chicago area traffic conditions remain very light this morning. Very few issues or delays on any of the expressways or tollways. If your plans are taking you to Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, or Iowa, give yourself extra time. We're hearing about blowing and drifting snow. Very icy road conditions indeed. Otherwise, Lakeshore Drive, all the area expressways, looking great. Support for traffic provided by McDonald's. I'm Paula Fagan with traffic on WBEZ.
Thanks, Paul. The Bulls up against the Knicks tonight. Right now, 29 degrees. The high around 30 degrees today. Wind chill taking us as low as 7 degrees. It's going to be a windy one. Winds up to 45 miles an hour. Tonight, cooling down to 18. And tomorrow looks nice. It'll be sunny, a high of 32. It will be pretty chilly, but, you know, it could be colder. Gusts right now at about 26 degrees. It's 27 degrees in Wadsworth, and in Valparaiso it's 31. The time now is 8:10, and you are listening to WBEZ.
On a Friday, it's morning edition from Mr. News. I'm Stephen Scoop.
I'm David Green. Last night, we got a feel for the political pressure faced by the Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
Boehner has yet to reach a deal with President Obama to avoid higher taxes and spending cuts at the end of the year. So he offered what he called Plan B. It offered lower marginal tax rates to everyone but millionaires. The White House didn't like it.
Neither, as it turns out that many members of Boehner's own party. Boehner had to admit the vote on his plan would fail, so he pulled it and sent the House home for Christmas. And here's Tamara Keefe reports.
This wasn't how Speaker John Boehner expected his night to turn out. Earlier in the day, he expressed confidence, not only that his bill would pass, but that the Democratic-controlled Senate would feel so much pressure it would be forced to consider it too.
I'm not convinced at all that when the bill passes the House today, that it will die in the Senate.
It turns out he was wrong, very wrong. And the problem was his fellow Republicans. Boehner's bill would have extended tax cuts for income up to $1 million, but it also would have raised taxes on those who make more than that. This made some conservatives uncomfortable. People like Mick Mulvaney from South Carolina.
I want to protect everybody. I think everybody pays too much in taxes, so I'm looking for some way to protect everybody.
And so, at around the time the bill should have been up for a vote, Boehner gathered his conference in the basement of the Capitol and told them he wouldn't bring it up. His whip team had counted the votes, and they didn't have enough. Steve LaTourette is a retiring representative from Ohio.
For this proposal, at the end of the day, you can't make people vote.
Many of the unconvinced were freshmen elected in the Tea Party wave of 2010. Tim Huelskamp from Kansas, the most vocal of the bunch, said the speaker was asking his members to take a vote that violated conservative principles. The conservatives rebelled.
This is not Republican material. I think that's probably why they pulled the plug and says, okay, let's regroup. Regroup and reassess what exactly do Republicans stand for, and actually pushing the things we can pull together on rather than divide ourselves on.
As LaTourette sees it, the speaker is stuck.
He can only play with the cards that he's dealt, and the voters have populated our conference with the Senate representatives, and he does his best to work with them. But sometimes your best isn't good enough in the face of some people that just don't want to find common ground.
My advice to the speaker is start drinking heavily.
Jack Pitney is a professor of politics at Claremont McKenna College, and he can't figure out why the speaker would make such a public push if he didn't have the votes lined up to begin with.
If he brings the proposal to the president president's going to say, look, John, how do I know you're going to get the support of the members of your conference? That's an extremely weak hand to be presenting when you're dealing with the president. So where this ends up, I don't know.
To those on the inside, the end game isn't any clearer. California's Buck McKeon, an ally of Boehner's, walked out of the conference meeting discouraged.
I don't know how we can get out of this mess.
He says the speaker may not get any credit for it, but he believes Boehner wants to do what is right.
And he thinks that with divided government, we should be able to do big things, and we can't do anything. And this is really, really sad.
The White House issued a statement last night saying the president will work with Congress and hopes to find a bipartisan solution quickly. There's not much time left. Congress doesn't plan to return to Washington until 2 days after Christmas. Tamara Keefe, NPR News, the Capitol.
Now let's talk about an economic change that's already in effect. Starting in January, about half of the hospitals in America are going to see their payments from Medicare go down. That's because the care they offer gets a low grade.
The other half of American hospitals will see their payments rise because they're meeting new standards. This is all according to the new federal healthcare law.
The change affects the cash flow at countless hospitals, and this is the subject of today's Business Bottom Line.
Reporter Jordan Rao with Kaiser Health News has analyzed the data that Medicare just released on its hospital payments. He's with us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what's Medicare trying to do?
Well, one thing they're trying to do is actually get hospitals to do a better job. Right now, if you go in and get a knee surgery, they'll pay you the same amount whether they make a perfect knee or put a spatula in. And so they're trying to do that. And then down the line, this is part of the overhaul of the system.
A spatula.